Alright, all my friends, today we'll be talking about Dawn. Now, I know, this is something that seems relatively basic, but sometimes the basics could be the thing that actually take you to the next level. I'm going to start off with the extreme basics first, very, very quickly, and then talk about some concepts about Dawn and my beliefs behind it, and hopefully you guys will be able to implement it into your own games, or if you guys have any other suggestions in terms of how you view Dawn, then go ahead and leave them in the comments below. But with that being said, just to start off for the very, very basics, if you guys have just gotten into the card game, maybe you are interested in Treasure Cup, you just got some cards over the holidays, maybe you're going to your first locals, you want to practice all those things, you want to get a little bit better, let me just tell you guys about the basics and then we'll go from there. So whether you go first or second, well, actually, if you go first, you get 1 Dawn when you start your turn. If you go second, you get 2 Dawn. And then regardless if you go first or second, you'll always get 2 Dawn for the rest of your turns until you get to 10 Dawn, because you have 10 Dawn in your Dawn deck, right? Once you're at 10 Dawn, you don't get any more. But of course, there's decks like Kaido that will send Dawn back to the Dawn deck, and then they'll be able to get their Dawn back again. But you'll never be able to exceed 10 Dawn, at least for right now in our current format of OPO1 and OPO2 and OPO3. So let's not confuse ourselves. Let's just stick with the basics. Okay, so that's how Dawn works, right? Dawn can be used for offense and defense, and that leads me into my first point. But Dawn as well, if it's active, you can attach it to a character or a leader. So what does that mean? Let's take our Monkey D. Luffy here, right? We have 1 active Dawn. We can attach that to our Luffy. Our Luffy now gets 1,000 power because it says your turn plus 1,000. So now our Luffy is 6,000 power. And as we all know, on offense, if your attack is equal or greater, you will win that battle. So now if this Monkey D. Luffy was to attack this Kaido here, then Kaido will need to get to 7,000 power in terms of counter in order to stop this Luffy's attack, right? Very basic. We all know these things. Cool. Now, one thing to keep in mind as well is this Dawn is your turn plus 1,000, meaning that you don't get the plus 1,000 on your opponent's turn. So at the end of my turn, the Kaido player can now attack it to Luffy because Luffy is not 6,000 anymore. He is 5,000. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And there's a reason why I'm bringing that up. And again, I will talk about that once I get to it later on in the video. Okay, so the first concept that I want to talk about Dawn and why it's very important and why I feel like it needs a video in itself is the concept of offense and defense, right? So I'm going to use the way that I like to talk about things and teach or anything like that is I like to use analogies. Hopefully you guys will be able to understand this analogy. If not, I do apologize, but I'm going to try my best to explain it. So if you guys have ever watched basketball before, right? When you have the ball, when your team has the ball, you guys are on offense. And if the enemy team has the ball, or the enemy team, if the opposing team has the ball, then you're on defense, right? You're going to try to stop them from scoring, whereas when you're on offense, you are going to try to score the basketball. Now, in One Piece, when you're on offense, you are trying to take life from your opponent, and when you're on defense, you are trying to stop your opponent from taking your life, right? So far, so good, right? We're on the same page. Why Dawn is so important and the most valuable resource in this entire game is because this enables either play. This right here enables offense and it enables defense. In the most basic form, your Dawn will allow you to play your characters, right? So we can tap 3 and play, let's look at the starter deck. What's 3? I think the Zoro is also 3 in the starter deck. Yeah. So we could play our Zoro, right? For 3. This is the most basic form of offense in the terms of you getting a unit on board. But then, of course, you can also attach your Dawn to these units and swing if they're active, of course. And that's another form of offense. So that's the most basic form of offense that you can do. But then it gets a lot more interesting when you're using a character like Monkey D. Luffy, where you can give one of your characters a rested Dawn. So if you're in a situation now where you have played your Tony Chopper as a blocker, and you also played your Roronoa Zoro, then of course you can go ahead and, well, this isn't the Rush Zoro, but you could go ahead and attach 1 Dawn to this Zoro. This Zoro gets plus 1,000 power, so now this Zoro's actually 7,000 power, right? So you're able to manipulate your Dawn that way. So you could do that on offense. Now, on defense, of course, you have access to event cards. So you have access to things like Guard Point and Radical Beam when it comes to the red deck. In terms of purple with Kaido, you have things like Thunder Bagawa and Blast Breath. And these are your tools that you're going to be using on defense. So in order to play offense and defense, Dawn is king. Dawn is the king of the pirates. This is the One Piece. You need your Dawn in order to do anything in this game. Now, why am I harping on this concept so much? The reason why is because you need to know what to do with your Dawn every single turn, and you need to know what your opponent is going to do with their Dawn every single turn. I know it might be overwhelming at first, but it is going to help you tremendously. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's start off basic and then we'll slowly get more and more advanced. So if we're talking about purple, right? Let's start with purple and then we'll go to red, right? I want to give you guys a decent amount of examples, so hopefully I can explain everything. So let's say you're going up against purple. Now, one of the things that you'll learn is purple doesn't really have a turn one play at all. If it goes first, which purple tends to want to do, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. If purple tends to go first, which they want to do, they'll get one Dawn, meaning that they literally will have no play at all, ever. Like, literally, they can't do anything on turn one. They can't play a card, they can't attack you, whatever. So you're at no threat, right? However, on turn 3, which is what all Kaido players want, they're now able to activate their card that basically makes a deck extremely broken. Whereas Search, they want to get their island. They want to get their Onigashima here. Hold on, I'm looking at the entire set here. I just want to look at the Kaido deck. Let's go ahead and just drag that there. Search, grab a Onigashima. Okay, so they want to play this on 3, to play it on curve, right? This is what they want to do. So you as a red player need to understand that this is Kaido's game plan. You need to understand that on their second turn, they want to play Onigashima because that is their game plan. You need to know this. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You will lose games if you don't know what your opponent wants to do. So with that being said, if Kaido wants this that badly, the next question is going to be, does Kaido want to go first or second in most matchups? If you guys answered first, you would be correct, because Kaido wants to get Onigashima Island out as fast as possible, and he wants to get it out optimally on curve. What does that mean? That means that because this costs 3 Dawn, the most ideal, perfect situation, a 10 out of 10 play for this Onigashima is to play it when you have 3 Dawn. When you have 3 Dawn, you can play Onigashima, and now it is at its most optimal time. If you go second, you actually have 4 Dawn, meaning that you'd have 1 Dawn left over, which it wouldn't be the absolute worst. Of course, we already talked about offense, defense. You could go ahead and attach it to your Kaido. Kaido can swing, all of those things. It's not the absolute worst, but ideally for your game plan to make things be smooth, to make things be optimal, you want to have Onigashima on turn 2 with 3 Dawn. As the game continues to go on, the opponent starts to get more and more Dawn. Those things happen. We need to start talking about defense. So when I talk about you need to know what your opponent does. The biggest thing that I would recommend to everybody is to play every single deck. And I'll make a video on that in the future within this series. But I want to talk about event cards. So every deck is probably going to play some type of events. Blue will probably play Love Beam. Green will probably play Paradise Waterfall. Some green builds don't play any at all. Some play Punk Gibson. With that being said, regardless, you need to be able to play around active Dawn on the defensive end. So, what do I mean by that? As the game goes on, right? Let's say I'm the Kaido player right now. Let's go ahead and add up our Dawn. So let's say this is the amount of Dawn that we have right now. I did my turn, I attacked, whatever. I'm going to go ahead and leave 2 Dawn open. If you are the Luffy player, what I always say is whenever I start my turn is I look at I don't care how many cards are in my opponent's hand when I start my turn. The first thing that I'm wondering is how many active Dawn they have. Like, to me, the active Dawn is more important than the cards that they have in their hand. Because they could have 2 cards in their hand, right? And like, say they have no active Dawn, then I'm thinking like, okay, at most they could have 4K worth of counter, right? 2K. But the moment that they have 1 or 2 active Dawn, that all changes. Do they have a Blast Breath and do they have a 2K counter? And then that way they are able to counter 6k? Do they have a Thunder Bagua and a 2k counter so they can counter 6k? Do they have 2 Blast Breaths and they're able to counter 8k, right? All of those things are going through my head before I even care about how many cards in their hand. Like, that is the second question. The first question is Dawn, because again, this is the king of the pirates. This is the One Piece. This is the most valuable resource. So that's the first thing that you need to look into. If my opponent has 2 active Dawn, the first thing that is going through my head is Thunder Bagua. Now, keep in mind, this Kaido player could be bluffing, right? That's also another layer of this Dawn management, of this Dawn game, which is this card game, literally just Dawn, right? He could leave 2 Dawn open and try to bluff and say like, oh, I have a Thunder Bagua. But meanwhile, he actually has no Thunder Bagua. Maybe he just has King in his hand that has no counter. Like, let's say his hand is like 9 cost, this king, and this king, right? Like, this is his hand at that point of the game state, and he has 2 Dawn open. These cards have no counters whatsoever, but you could be thinking like, oh, like he could have a Thunder Bagua in hand. Regardless, what I always say is you have to expect the worst, right? He could be bluffing, but he could have the Thunder Bagua. So that changes your entire game plan. If you're trying to go for lethal, if you're trying to go on offense and you're trying to attack, expect there to be a Thunder Bagua. So if you're trying to go for lethal, then of course you want to take that calculation into account when you're pumping up your leader. If not, then you want to play on defense. Maybe you have your own defensive cards, right? Maybe you have your guard points. Maybe you have your radical beams and things of that nature that you could use on defense. And you want to leave those open, and then you could try to attack into him to try to make him use his Thunder Bagua or whatever other resource. And then if he takes a hit, then you can go like, okay, maybe he was bluffing. But prior to that, you always need to assume that you always have to assume the worst once your opponent leaves active Dawn, because they are using it on defense. You have to think, if they're not using it to swing into you, right, on offense, it means that they're using it, they want to use it on defense, right? It's very, very simple in that aspect. And it's something that I need to mention because whether I face people online or if I go to locals or anything like that, I see people that will just, like, you know, they'll just load, they won't load up the right amount of Dawn, and like they'll kind of just play on autopilot because people have told them, oh, get your damage to 7,000 if you want to get your hit. So then they'll pump up Luffy to 7,000 and attach 2 Dawn, and then it might be a mirror match. They're attacking the other Luffy, they have 1 Dawn open. Oh, by the way, guard points plus 3,000 counter, right? Like, whereas if you just added that 1 extra Dawn, if they had that guard point, well, now that doesn't work, right? So those are the types of things where you can't play on autopilot. You have to look at the active Dawn. You have to analyze the situation, determine what that deck's options are on defense, and then from there you can accordingly attach your Dawn. So hopefully that explains what I mean by offense and defense. So now the next concept that I want to talk about is I like to call it little attackers. That's my word for it. So what do I mean by little attackers? Let's go ahead and talk about it. This is still the starter deck Luffy stuff. Let's go to set 1 here. I want to search for Nami. Just to give an example, because Nami is a card that a lot of people are going to be playing. If they're playing Red, if they're playing Law, if they're playing Zoro, it doesn't matter, right? So once Nami hits the board, you're able to search. Now, a lot of people might think that this is just a dead card after that, right? Well, no, Nami is an attacker. What does that mean? With 3 Dawn, Nami can now start hitting into the leader. The longer that the game goes on and Nami's on the board, the bigger threat that Nami has. And this is something that is actually something that's really important that I was telling my girlfriend when she was first learning to play the game. And it's something that she's actually implemented really well. And she was able to start taking games and winning at locals by implementing this strategy as well, right? You have to make sure that you're utilizing these cards as attackers. There's so many times where I'll see people play and they'll just put their Dawn on their Zoros, they'll put it on their Luffy, they'll put it on their big bodies to try to get those hits in. But if you guys have watched my previous video as well, where we broke down John's Ivankov game against the film Red Law in top 8, I believe it was, in the most recent huge tournament in Japan, you'll see that he was using his Perona. Perona has, I think, the identical stat line as Nami, 1 drop, 2,000 power. When he was trying to set up for his lethal play, what was the first thing that he did? He attached 3 Dawn to his Perona to make it 5k to swing. Because remember, Perona isn't a threat in the early game because it's not going to attack. But as the game goes on, you get more and more Dawn, you have more and more resources. Nami is now a threat. Perona is now a threat because this 5k will be able to swing into the leader, and then now your opponent is going to have to use a counter out of hand, which then opens up the plays for your leader, opens up the plays for your other big beaters, be it your Shanks, be it your Zoros, be it whatever it might be, whatever color you're playing. These little attackers open up the game for your bigger attackers. So please do not feel like you always have to just pump up the Dawn onto your big characters to get your big attacks through. Use your little characters, especially if they're in lethal threshold. Use these characters to attack first. It feels so bad on the defensive end having to use resources to counter this Nami when you want to use it on the big bodies instead, right? So put your opponent in that situation instead. Make them take hits from these little guys, so now your bigger hitters can come in and get guaranteed hits without the use of that much Dawn. This is crucial. I'm telling you guys, if you start implementing this, you will realize that there's so many other situations where you can win simply because these cards are attackers. They're not just dead cards after you use them. They are offensive weapons in the late game. Okay, so I talked about offense, defense. I talked about little attackers, utilizing them and things like that. Why else is Dawn extremely important? Well, especially for purple, Dawn allows you to set up early lethal plays, especially in set 2. I won't talk too much about set 2 because this is Road to Treasure Cup for set 1. But in terms of Dawn, Kaido in set 2 can also neg your opponent Dawn, which I already talked about how this is like water, right? Like this is the cream of the crop. Being able to minus one of your opponent's Dawn can completely throw off their entire game plan. But regardless, this is a key resource for decks like Kaido, and I also want to talk about, again, where I was talking about having to, or knowing what your opponent wants to do, you have to remember that Kaido can trash 7 Dawn in order for you to take 1 life. So because of that, if you're not, whether it's a mirror match or whether you're playing any other deck, when you're going up against Kaido, another reason why you need to pay attention to Dawn every single turn, especially when you're facing Kaido, is always ask them how many Dawn they are at. You need to remember that once you get to a certain life threshold, if you are playing against Kaido, he can trash 1 card from your life instantly. You can't interact with it. So as long as he has 7 Dawn, or 7 Dawn coming up on his next turn, that is a real threat. Now, it depends on the skill of the Kaido player when he wants to utilize that. But with that being said, it is something that he can and will do. So you have to anticipate that, and you always have to know how much Dawn he has. Remember, he can minus these Dawn back to his Dawn deck even if they are used, so he can attack and then do them. So you have to also consider that option as well. And so what do I mean by all of this? So what I mean by that is, if he only has Onigashima, right, he's basically getting 2 Dawn per turn, so that allows him to be able to get an additional Dawn to hopefully be able to trash 1 of your life. Now, if he utilizes cards like the 10-drop Kaido, that's going to blow up the entire board. If you're in a situation where you have your 10 Dawn, you tap out your full 10 Dawn in order to play it, and then you use your 10-drop Kaido ability, and you send back, I believe you have to send back 5 Dawn, if I'm not incorrect. Is it 5 or 6? I'll verify it here, but let's just throw back 5 for now. Let me just search here. We'll search Kaido, just because I want to give you guys the most accurate information. So it is 6. So you see, it's a good thing we checked. So you're going to send back 6 Dawn, right? So now the Kaido player has Kaido on board, and he only has 4 Dawn. But what this means is next turn, right? What will he be able to do? Next turn, he's going to be able to refresh, get 2 Dawn, tap Onigashima to get 1 rested Dawn. All of a sudden, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So what does that mean? Not only does he have Kaido on board, but he also has his 10-drop Kaido on board as well, who is 12k. So let's go ahead and pull him up. If we go ahead and type Kaido here, boom. So Kaido is here, -6. He had 4, gets 2, he's at 6. Onigashima, he's at 7. So now if the turn passes back to him, he now has 6 active, 1 rested. A play that every Kaido does, and one that I love to do, is attach all the Dawn here to Kaido, swing. If your opponent can't block it, haha, you take the hit. Oh, by the way, I'm going to trash these 7 Dawn. Now you lose 2 life. You're in lethal range. Have fun trying to block this 12k. If you have it, great. If not, then I win. So you have to imagine that scenario if that happens. So because of that, once this card hits the board, it's basically ticking time bomb. Obviously, depending on the game state, depending on how much life you have. Obviously, if you have 3 life, you're not in threat of that. If you have 2 life, you need to identify that. And then now you have to win the game. That's something that you have to recognize. Do not be like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm going to play safe for this or that. If you realize, if you don't have the guard points, if you don't have the radical beams, if you cannot stop a 13k Kaido into a 12k Kaido attack, you need to win that turn. And all of this information comes from knowing how much Dawn your opponent has, knowing how much Dawn they are going to get. This is the most important thing. If there's anything that you guys can take away from this video, it is always know how much Dawn your opponent has, and always know what your opponent can do with their Dawn, whether it is active or whether it is not if they are playing purple. If they're not playing purple, you don't have to worry about that second part. You only have to worry about the active Dawn. That's the only thing you need to worry about, and you need to look at all of the events and think about what they can potentially do. By doing that alone, I guarantee you guys, you'll start to see a lot more success. I hope this video helped. I know I rambled on a little bit, but this is how I view Dawn. This is how I really feel like it allowed me to take my game to the next level and understand the game a lot more. It's just focusing on Dawn. This is the first thing that you need to focus on. Before you focus on the hand, before you focus on the board, you need to focus on Dawn. And once you have Dawn established, you can then now focus on the hand. And that is a perfect segue to the next video, which I will be talking about counters and knowing how to play around them and knowing how to optimize your attacks. So stay tuned for part 2 in this series where we talk about that. If you guys are enjoying this, if you think that this is helpful, please let me know in the comment section below. Give me a like to show that this is actually some type of content that you guys are enjoying. That way I know to continue to make more. I'll try to pump them out a lot faster as Treasure Cup is right around the corner. And of course, leave your questions down below. Thank you so much, guys. It was an amazing 2022, and I hope 2023 can be even better. Love you guys. Take it easy. Peace.